Well, thank you everyone for making it out on a seasonal mid-October day in Montana. We are down a couple people today, excused absences for both of them. So we have quorum here, so we're gonna go ahead and get started and move through. As you have in your meeting handouts packets here, we're going to start out, as always, with some opportunity for public comment. Then we'll look to have a motion to approve the minutes from our last meeting. Then we'll get into the meat of the day. We're going to talk about the remaining alternatives that we should be maybe considering, maybe not. That's kind of what you're here for. And also, this is I think the meeting a lot of you have been waiting for, is to say what of the alternatives that we have, this big bucket of alternatives, what's missing? Are there anything that's missing that we haven't thought of that we should be having consideration? So we'll walk through that. Then we'll talk about evaluation criteria. So the idea there is, once we have certain alternatives in place, how are we going to decide, how are we going to score them, how are we going to decide whether they are valuable in keeping and whether they ultimately end up in the IWRP update for this current time. And then we'll talk about next steps, and your homework is going to be taking an online survey that we have not sent out yet intentionally, but you'll get that. And our goal, our hope is that that you can have that survey filled out by the time by 1 month from today. So we'll have time to work it into the meeting materials for the next time. But I think it's exciting for next time, because once all of you are able to fill out that survey that are going to be talking about the scoring criteria or evaluation criteria, we'll be able to come back and say, here's what you said as a group. How do you feel about this? And hopefully we'll kind of start steering towards a consensus there. So without further ado, I'll turn over to staff Jessica for public comment.
Okay, so just for the record, all written public comment that was submitted for the committee before 5 p.m. yesterday was circulated, so you all should have that. This is the time to comment on any non-agenda matter falling within the scope of the Integrated Water Resources Planning Committee. There will also be time in conjunction with each agenda item in which a formal recommendation is being made, but you may only speak once per topic. Please note the committee cannot take action on any item that does not appear on the agenda. All persons addressing the committee shall speak in a civil and courteous manner, and members of the audience shall be respectful of others. Please state your name and place of residence in an audible tone of voice for the record, and limit your comments to 3 minutes. Any public comment? With that. Thank you. Okay, we can shift into approval of minutes. Would anyone like to propose the approval of minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Thank you. Second. Great. Paul? Yes to the minutes? Okay.
Yes.
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 Good. Okay, great. Alrighty.
So before I get into alternatives review, I just wanted to introduce Susan Butler. So she is with Jacobs, another consulting engineering firm, who teamed with us on the previous IWRP and is teaming with us on this one. She brings a lot of national kind of expertise on integrated water resources planning across the globe, or across the nation at least, maybe the globe. Not just Montana. So Susan, if you want to just briefly introduce yourself.
Well, good morning. Thank you for letting me support this important effort. I'm happy to be here. Just a little bit about me. 18 years of public service, was the Water Resources and Conservation Director for the San Antonio Water System. For about 12 years, worked for a small community of about 10,000 people prior to that. And then I do currently serve as the Global Principal for Integrated Water Resource Management at Jacobs. We work in about 40 countries, I think. I don't work in each of them, but a lot of work in Australia and the UK and across the US. So, have a lot of opportunity to learn from the good work of others. Excited to be here.
Where's home, Greg?
Texas, these days.
I'm sorry that I couldn't bring the snow over the hill from you, for you.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I was super excited last week. It was like 60 degrees here and I'd be hiking.
We could still be hiking.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Susan said she saw a guy in shorts today, so that would must be local.
Don't wanna go to the campus and you'll see people in shorts all winter, so.
So Susan's been involved obviously in the background, just thought this was an appropriate meeting to bring her in physically to the discussion about alternatives, and as we look to discuss potentially other alternatives, what are other communities doing? So that's kind of why Susan is here now. I don't think she'll be present at any other TAC meetings physically, but potentially virtually. Tonight is PAC number 3, correct? Yeah, it's the third Public Advisory Committee meeting, and we'll be presenting the 2013 alternatives for the first time to them. And we're framing those into categories, slightly different than they were presented in the previous IWRP, just to help them access those from a slightly different standpoint. They don't have the technical background, so we're not going to get into all the technical details of each alternative. We're going to talk about them in terms of categories. And so I thought this was also a good way to prime the pump, so to speak, for the conversation that we're going to have now regarding alternatives. So I'm going to go through the categories again that we've compiled for the PAC, just to initiate thought and discussion. So the first one, and these are kind of focused around the 2013 alternatives. The first category is water conservation. We put this first for the PAC because it's the big shiny star, the thing that the city has done the most on since 2013, and seen the most progress and relied upon the most. I don't think there's a lot to discuss here right now. The second category is water reuse. And so there were 7 or so alternatives kind of surrounding water reuse in the 2013 IWRP. Various configurations of reusing the reclamation facility effluent for potable, non-potable, replacing irrigation water, various configurations of that. So that's kind of how we're grouping them for the PAC. Any questions on this category? The second category, or third category that we came up with, and we think is standalone, distinct, because of its potential importance. I think the city is already doing some of these things, but expanding the non-potable system. So like we've talked about, they currently use non-potable water to irrigate the cemetery as well as the sports park, which were projects developed since the 2013 IWRP. So this category looks at all different options of expanding those systems, including potentially developing a utility, a purple pipe utility, as it's called sometimes, and targeting different sources for that potable, non-potable utility.
Would that utility be a city of Bozeman utility?
That's the thought, yeah. But it's not only that, it could be targeted like they're doing that, like the city's doing now with, you know, the cemetery and the sports park. It could be targeted specific areas rather than a full-on purple pipe utility. The other thing that I think Sean would point out if he were here is that there the city is getting more focused on utilizing or optimizing, I think I have it here, optimizing the water rights that are coming in through annexations. So when there are ditch rights that come in with developments, they're being a little more intentional or focused on having the developers use those rights for non-potable use for irrigation systems specifically.
This is also where the city was talking about creating a water district in the outer bands as using either the ditch water or the groundwater, and then creating a water district to then be distributed for just purely irrigation purposes, not potable uses. Is that where this would fall in?
I think that, yes, and also some of the other categories, there's a storage category as well that I'll cover, that the solar project, I think is what you're referring to, is kind of more fits into that, and that was envisioned as a private project that the city would lease water from. I think that's what you're referring to when you're
I
talking
was
about.
thinking that he was indicating that the city would actually create a city water district to do it, that it wasn't gonna be leased out, at least that was my understanding.
So I don't think the city would create a new water district per se, they would just increase their current portfolio and
Okay.
utility. Creating a separate utility in terms of non-potable distribution, I think that's maybe where the disconnect.
Maybe that's how we refer to it as.
Yeah, just basically another infrastructure system to supply non-potable water across the city.
Yeah, well, to the newer developments. You were calling it purple pipe?
Purple pipe, yeah, so sorry, that's like an industry word.
No, that's okay.
For reuse water and non-potable water, just generally non-potable.
Does the pipes are purple?
Yeah, it's a signal to people that, you know, if they uncover it,
Yeah,
Yeah, they're literally
a
purple.
lot of times, you know, if it's black, you know, HDPE, you know, pipe, if it has a blue stripe, you know, it's carrying water. If it has a green stripe, it's carrying wastewater. You know, purple pipe indicates that it's not potable, but it's not wastewater either.
Sure.
It has some type of beneficial use. So,
is pipe actually purple or is it just a purple
Yeah.
stripe?
Yeah.
Depends.
Oh, okay.
if it's black HDPE, it'll have a purple stripe. But there, you know, if it's PVC pipe, it'll be extruded as purple, like a really light purple color.
Yeah, sorry, should explain that. The next category is groundwater development. Another, area where there were a few, alternatives kind of within this category in the 2013 IWRP. There was the Madison Aquifer, the Belgrade sub area, and then just groundwater within the city limits. As you all know, the city is currently working on this. There's a basin-wide groundwater model that they're using to inform test well locations, identifying test well locations, which I think may be happening this summer.
Sure,
Okay,
yeah, I can get back to you on that.
I think that's coming up though, imminent. Any questions on groundwater development alternatives?
The only question I have is on Madison. I'm not exactly aware of where the Madison would be where you could tap into it for groundwater, so I was wondering if that's really a viable option. And
I agree, I don't think that's a viable option moving forward. I was just noting that it was 2013 an option considered. And I don't know, I'm not tied in, we're not tied into the groundwater work. I think Brian Houston could probably present a little more detail on where that project is at to this group, would probably be useful.
During Brian's presentation at the last meeting, he mentioned the wells that were the test wells at the Sporting Park, and that they hadn't found the supply there that they had thought that they would. And then, but you mentioned getting a new contractor for that, so I was curious if what you just mentioned in terms of finding new locations is part of that, continued thing, or if he's finding a new contractor for that same location for additional.
New
New
locations,
locations, so no longer looking in that area for
Correct.
additional supply, okay, thank you.
correct. And then that reminded me, the third bullet I have here is partnering with Belgrade. I think Sean would, speaking as on behalf of Sean, I think he would like to bring up that there's been some very preliminary discussions on a shared well with the city of Belgrade.
Is everybody aware of the white paper that Alan did as part of this? Because I mean, that was what he did that following the 2013, we're looking at potential locations for groundwater wells, but
Yeah,
that kind of set the,
Yeah, I mean, the main caveat I think for that is that, at the time, the request was, for where the city could potentially drill wells, it would, that would meet that demand target that they had in the original report. And so it was basically looking for a well field that could produce like 3,000 gallons a minute. So it's, I'm assuming now they may be looking at maybe more sites with lower yields, so there's probably sites that are suitable that have been considered in that report just because of that design.
next category is new surface water sources, or import, from other watersheds. Those examples have all been discussed. Missouri River, Canyon Ferry, Yellowstone, Rapid Creek. I think we all kind of maybe landed on last time that Rapid Creek was no longer feasible. Any additional thoughts or discussion items here?
My only main thought is on some of these, it just seems like a pretty extreme step to go to try to get water in a basin that does have a lot of physical water available, so it's wouldn't be at the top of my list.
I will say that the Yellowstone is potentially off the table as well from a legal standpoint. As far as I understand, maybe you guys know more, but most of it is already spoken for. So.
I was curious how that, I know Jessica, you mentioned that option came up, I think as a public comment, maybe, and that's how it got incorporated into this list, or was it something that, besides the public comment?
Yeah, this was studied during the last plan as well,
Oh.
and then since then, we have received some public comment in support of exploring that concept further.
If I could provide a little color to this slide, the idea behind these four different surface waters, I think Bracket Creek, it's relatively low hanging fruit because it's close. I think it's accessible by the infrastructure, relatively accessible, to infrastructure that the city has.
compared to, as far as proximity.
Right, it just has limitations in terms of water widths. Yellowstone River was brought up last round, like was said. Actually highly supported by water treatment plant staff at that time. Bob's barrier is a big mountain range in between. And the pass. Canyon Ferry represents kind of the gold standard of the way the city views Highlight Reservoir. It's, stored water, very lucrative contracting capabilities with respect to the water that's available from the Bureau of Reclamation that's stored in that reservoir.
In terms of the cost, the Bureau of cost for the water,
You see, it's relatively affordable as well. It does increase.
Legally available.
Yeah, and then if you look at the Missouri River, fair distance away, but, probably as large or larger than the Yellowstone River, in this region, downstream of Three Forks, and a lot closer than Canyon Ferry. So I went from bottom to top, but I think if you look at those 4 surface water sources, it kind of brackets the range and, realm of possibilities within the, some could say Canyon Ferry is not reasonable as a distance. I don't know if the board or the TAC would have any interest, but in terms of what other water poor or, water short areas are doing, it's actually not out of line.
Looking at what California has done and
Looking at what
water and great
Looking at what
distance.
North Dakota is doing. North Dakota is building a 165-mile, 72-inch diameter pipeline from the Missouri River to eastern North Dakota.
And these would just be like considering like the feasibility with regard to how this alternative meets the criteria, like that's not something that has really been, like that's something that we're trying to decide about moving forward with. So, I mean, I see this option in particular, the import option, and we talked about this a bit last time, like the challenges just inherent, especially just really legally and related to the permitting that would be required are pretty great. But if it means, I think exploring the feasibility could have public value, I don't want to jump ahead myself and just presume whether or not there would be sufficient public support, that kind of thing. I am thinking with the criteria in mind, but I was here for the open house they had like last weekend and the weekend before, and I fell in love with this place even more. A little bit. It's so fun. I myself feel a little squeamish about this alternative, but I'm not opposed to more analyses being conducted to really explore it, so.
I had one thought on that too, which would be more like, looking into the future, but I don't know if there's any process or possibility for City of Bozeman to somehow work with the Bureau of Rec to make some agreement on a reservation for some of that available stored water for future use. Like say over, city would hold an ability to purchase some chunk of that reserved water, between now and, the next 50 years, so that if they did decide to go that route, they would at least, secure that right to that reserved water.
It's 300,000 acre feet
Yeah, that
available.
was what has been contractually available. Obviously, there's some allocations that are taken. I think Tofton Reservoir Canal, Tofton Canal and Irrigation District or something like that has an allocation from it. The city of Helena has about 11,000 or so acre feet that it uses for drinking water purposes. I don't necessarily think that that's a bad idea. The only contracting that I'm aware of, from other surface water sources that the Bureau of Reclamation manages is that, you can, those contracts I think are 40-year contracts. And so, the city might be able to enter into an arrangement where there's maybe a higher payment for a certain amount of water gets reserved. And I've seen where some of the agreements are stepped, to where there's, maybe a volume that's, fairly typical that they're gonna use, and maybe like an advance volume, that could potentially be accessed later on in that 40-year term. But you pay a little bit less for that on an acre foot basis. So it wouldn't hurt to, and we did have some engagement with the Bureau of Reclamation when we did the regionalization study that looked at the Canyon Ferry and Missouri River options. The Bureau also admitted that they were doing some assessment of that 300,000 acre feet, whether that was going to be adjusted. I guess I haven't followed up with them to see where that study is at.
Is the Tofton irrigation project, are they looking at actually taking that water from Canyon Ferry or doing some sort of upstream swap? I mean, that's the other thing.
My understanding is there's an arrangement between that entity, the state and the Bureau, where Toston, that entity can actually take water ahead of the storage or count it as storage, as stored water. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I'm not super familiar with it, but that aligns more closely with what what I think is a more feasible option in this case. Like in the city's case, is doing something like that instead of rerouting it back. But, yeah, I don't know too much about that.
And that was discussed, I think, before too, wasn't it? The idea of, you know, seeing if there's a way to actually like maybe capture water out of the river system during high flow that would have gone into storage in Canyon Ferry and somehow getting, you know, availability of that water from a legal standpoint, but.
Yep.
Is that wrapped into this alternative specifically still?
Yes. Yes.
So with regards to taking the water out of the Missouri River, was this ever looked at deeply enough to determine where on the Missouri that the water would actually be taken, and what is the distance between there and obviously going the full distance to Canyon Ferry itself?
It's been looked at Toston.
Right at Toston?
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't know, I don't think it's been looked at in detail in any other location, from a legal standpoint or physical standpoint either. But that is something potentially to consider.
I think as part of that regionalization study, we looked at upstream of the Three Fork area.
Gallatin would be the logical choice.
And then we looked at just downstream of the confluence, and both of those locations were tenuous. It's because of the amount of water that's available and senior rates.
Is there sufficient water in the Missouri to go ahead and be actually looking at this? As far as allocation, I mean, we're already saying that taking water from the Gallatin has problems because of water rights. Is the Missouri any different? Is there any excess water to be taken? And if so, is it only during high water?
Potentially striking the balance of how much water would be withdrawn from the river, because the closer you get to Canyon Ferry Reservoir, you know, the reduced amount of appropriators you have.
Yeah.
You know, that are going to take water or be, you know, potentially be a senior water right holder. So that was kind of why we looked at those 4 different locations. And the closer you got to Canyon Ferry, the more lucrative it got. For obvious reasons.
And the reason why the Gallatin River isn't on here is because there's no allocation to be had, right?
Yeah, correct.
Okay. I guess my feeling is that having looked at what our projected growth rate is of Bozeman, and I mean, the numbers I think speak for themselves. At some point, is it 30 years, is it 40 years? I think this only presents itself as kind of the go-to in some way, because I don't know where else we're really gonna get enough water to go ahead and meet the need. So I guess I like the idea of Missouri and Canyon Ferry, and believe me, I never thought I would ever even said that prior to being part of this committee. But in just looking at the numbers themselves, and it just portrays it. We're fortunate that we at least have this option, should the valley grow to those numbers. And I guess my thought is what can be done to just kind of, as you were indicating, are there any initial steps to just simply lay this out there to just kind of be prepared that in 10 years from now, when the new group is sitting right here again, looking at this water resource plan, they're gonna say, well, has anything been done in the last 10 years to kind of make this, do we know any more about it? So I guess that's kind of how I would present this going forward, and where it would be in the list of alternatives.
Clayton, you?
Well, on the Toston, yeah, my guess is one of the legal challenges is the hydro rates on Toston and those flow rates. But I was just gonna, on this slide, I guess I'm a little bit confused about the purpose of these slides. If these are just for our internal purposes, I think this is fine, but if these are the slides that are used for the PAC, I just would highlight on the new surface water sources, I know it's being duplicative, but the optimization of water rights acquired through annexation is also new surface water. And that like the only option for new surface water, there are options beyond import, if we want to use that rough word. All of this looks like the only option for new surface water that we're exploring is importing water from one of these various places, but in my mind, at least, the way that I think of surface water, I also would include the low-hanging fruit of optimization of surface water from dish companies and all the annexation of irrigation rights.
Yeah, I just didn't know that. What's that?
I just made a note of that, so we'll make sure that happens.
Yeah, I guess I thought that was kind of almost like a separate slide. Yeah, I agree with you because it is under the surface water that I was assuming that we're already.
It's technically under the non-potable system development, but I think it fits in both of those categories.
And I agree that if this is going to the PAC, that is important to go ahead and help give that clarification because they're thinking surface water and ditches in the canal that are in.
Sure. Yeah, maybe we specifically call this import and then surface water optimization or water rights optimization.
Or maybe switch this one in the next slide about storage.
This is the way that it was written, I think it's just gonna cause some alarm bells from people when it just looks like the only way that we're looking at this is through an import fund.
Sure. Yep. So storage category, increased Bozeman's water storage. There's many alternatives brought up in the 2013 IWRP surrounding sourdough storage. Optimizing or increasing highlight reservoir storage. Aquifer storage and recovery, again, that crosses over to groundwater and non-potable, but also storage. And then offline dish storage, Tim, that's the project I think you were referring to, is the solar project, and other versions of that. Any questions or thoughts here?
I wanted to make a plug or see if, nature-based approaches to storage were included in this alternative. Yeah, restoration-based approaches to storage.
Yeah, I definitely think that is clear that needs to be an alternative that we look at, especially within sourdough, but potentially other places.
I think that is, I view that through a watershed lens, a watershed scale lens that is pretty distinct from these examples.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, just second that. I mean, when I think of storage, I sort of think of all of the above being concrete surface, like physically built surface storage, underground aquifer storage, which is reflected here, and then that natural water storage process-based restoration component, how we can enhance watershed yield through those processes.
Sure. So maybe it's a third category, or whatever number I'm on, category.
Is the solar project, what's the status of that? Is that still something that could be a potential viable option in the future, or have the people moved on and property is still available, all that kind of stuff, or?
From my understanding, the private entities working on that just walked away. But from a physical standpoint, I think it's still an option, viable option from an engineering standpoint.
I guess, part of my question there is, in this case, I mean, the land involved was a key component to it, where it was and how it was configured, so I guess, the question is that land still okay?
Don't know.
So there was a private entity who had that property.
Yeah, I'm not sure who actually owned the property or how that was all worked out, but
I think the landowners were working with some other entities that were going to develop, looking at developing it. We have there's a memo from a while back, 2011 maybe, about this project that we can share with you all.
I found the slide deck. I didn't find a report, but yeah, we can track something down and share more about solar.
Okay, I think it was a report.
Okay, maybe there's that as well. Okay, we can share that, all of that, either way.
has the city considered, I mean, under that, we use solar as the example, but is the city considered kind of doing an assessment to figure out which other locations in the valley might be suitable for that?
To my knowledge.
You have to be looking along those major ditches, but.
Yeah, I mean, in conversation with Brian, I think it's still something they wanna look at, for sure, but whether or not, I don't think anything's been done to move it forward or look at more details. I presume that would be part of this project.
Do you know how much of the land they were talking about with regard to ownership?
Good question.
I don't know exactly what the land coverage was, but I thought it was in the realm of 2,500 acre feet or something like that.
Yeah, it wasn't huge. I don't know, I don't remember the surface area. But it's I've seen it before, so we'll get you that information.
The reason why I was asking is, I mean, is it potential for the city to just simply buy that parcel then, where this is gonna be built? I mean, I'm just throwing that out as far as, like, I know the city grows,
Yeah,
but if there's an extra reach for this purpose, then that would make sense.
yeah,
It's kind of out by Gateway, right?
it was out by Gateway, yes.
So it's a ways away, but. I guess my only other question, I don't wanna waste too much here, but on these kinds of options, I mean, that would still, the solar project, I assume, were they looking at purchasing or somehow acquiring some flood rights or some junior high water rights, or what was their source of water gonna be for the storage?
I think it was Farmers Canal ditch rights, as well as, high water in Gallatin diverting. I don't know exactly and I think the Farmers Canal were involved, but I may be speaking out of line there.
Regarding analysis for ditch storage, and maybe others are aware of this, but MSU and Dr. Adam Ziegler are putting together a proposal right now to the USDA, which we're writing a letter of support for, to identify areas where there's irrigation infrastructure that might be able to contribute to groundwater recharge. So that could be something that's taken into account for a certain analysis of that option.
Cool. That reminded me of something else. Now it's gone. It'll come back.
I also just wanted to echo what these two already said around natural storage being securely a part of the storage option. And then just a question about these slides, and if, I know you mentioned these are going to be presented to the PAC, and are you looking for feedback from this group in terms of how these are presented to the PAC, or are we digging into some of the alternatives now to say, what's missing, well, I see that's coming in the agenda, or like, are we tweaking these right now? I think that's coming, right?
That's coming, yeah, in terms of additional alternatives and kind of our opinions of these ones. That discussion is just starting and will continue.
Okay, so this is.
But if you do have suggestions on changes to the PAC, that
For
those
the
are welcome
PAC,
too.
I was just making sure I understood what we're doing right now. Sure, thank you.
Yeah, I think that the core rationale for displaying this differently for them was that we felt like the way that the 2013 IWRP listed the alternatives felt very technical, very kind of clinical. And we thought, Zach's idea is like, what if we just came up with buckets and be able to put those in kind of logical buckets, understanding that, yeah, some alternatives would fit in multiple buckets, kind of like a Venn diagram type thing. So that was our hope, was to be able to just kind of put these out there as more tangible than just those kind of clinical things, so.
That was the last category, turns out. So these ones, we presented this slide maybe last time.
I think it was last year.
These are, quote unquote, new supply alternatives that the city, brought to the table that they'd like to see it incorporated into the IWRP. I think Brian talked about many of these last time. Jess, I don't know if you wanted to, do you want to add any?
Yeah, I think I'll just mention, first, you all have a handout. There was a request for any additional information that we do have about these to share that. So we have a handout with that for you to take home. And I'm realizing there are links within that, so I'll email that to you as well so you can click on links. But I guess just to say that, you know, these are ideas the city has, some of which have been a little bit more fleshed out than others, right? Some we just think would be worth evaluating, and that's about as far as we've gotten. And so it kind of includes the whole gamut there. And then I'll also mention that I believe in September, we did not present on the drought reserve or the shared water supply with Belgrade. So I'll just mention the drought reserve, the intent behind that would be to basically earmark water from our supply that would be used only for emergencies or in an extreme drought event. That's a recommendation in our current drought management plan. We have not done like a full study on that. There's a couple different ways we've thought about what that could look like. Either earmarking some of our shares in Highlight Reservoir, potentially working with the state to see if we could kind of transfer our 20% conveyance loss from our shares in Highlight to be a like strategic water reserve for this purpose. So just some ideas. Again, we haven't really taken that to the point of really finalizing anything by any means. So that'd be kind of more of a resilient strategy, which is why I mentioned it. It would actually sort of take away water, right, from what we would, you know, have for growth. And so I wanted to call that out. And then Zach already mentioned the shared water supply concept, which is, yeah, just really early conversations with the city of Belgrade about opportunities there, so.
Is there an extra, I saw it in a spot that didn't, I don't think it had, I didn't even notice that.
Which one are you looking for?
Just the,
This one?
packets included, yeah, just all of them. Not urgent right now, I'm so sorry, I didn't totally. Yeah. Little horns. I'm not panicking, it's fine.
Of those many bullets up there, are there any that don't make sense, but it's on a short descriptor or title of each one of those that we can go into greater detail?
Well, I guess the only thing I'm not clear on is, it's like, I mean, the first three are already, we just went through those that were previously presented. So I'm a little confused as to why we're showing those as new alternatives.
Yeah, that's, maybe I should have revised the title of the slide. I think the intent is to say that the city supports those specifically from the last integrated plan. And then in addition, here are some other ideas. So yeah, I guess the first three aren't new. They're from the last plan as well. And then everything after that, for the most part, I believe, I mean, we look at some non-pot irrigation, but are generally newer concepts. And with some resiliency strategies in there too, like the watershed yield improvement would be more of a resiliency project. And I've already heard today kind of support for that sort of concept. So maybe that's something that is new in this plan too, right? Maybe we focus on calling out resiliency or nature-based or things that maybe we didn't call out specifically in the last plan, so.
So it's sort of basically sort of preferred and new alternatives.
Yes.
Yeah, see.
Say something? I was just gonna say, under that watershed road improvement one, I think there's a lot of options there that could kind of nestle under there, and then we're talking here about potential forest management, and cloud seeding as examples here. And could see those both being pretty big, where I could imagine them coming out as individual alternatives perhaps. Anyway, I don't know if we're going there right now, but.
We're getting close to there, but,
Yeah, that's a good point.
So on the utility interconnect, what other utilities have been identified with regards to cooperative efforts?
to my knowledge, we haven't really taken it that far. We just recognize that there could be benefits to like further explore that concept.
Okay,
Yeah, so it would be, very preliminary. Belgrade, that, and that actually the intent with Belgrade is really to have a supply that would be shared to, give us more water, right, to meet demands, et cetera. I think the intent initially with the utility interconnect was to have, again, in the name of resiliency, right, more of like a source for, backup, right, emergency, things like that, so.
well, if that one utility is providing enough water for the ranch in Shields Valley to go ahead and water their golf course, it seems like they have some extra water to be able to share. But that, I was wondering, I mean, how much water do they have? If they have that much water to be able to sell at a bulk level, does anybody know how much they have access to?
I think the bigger question is, the legal versus the physical availability. I think Belgrade's looking at it like, you can put a well in Belgrade and get 1,000 gallons of that well, so there's a tremendous aquifer there. They don't have any trouble getting water, but I don't know how the water rates and all that would work, but the city of Belgrade developing additional water.
They would need a permit for that flow rate for sure. And in a closed basin, we talked about that last time, how, the challenges related to that process.
And I don't know whether they currently have, enough rights secured, above and beyond what their needs are, if that's the one that they're looking at, or just know it's an idea of the.
Yeah, I don't know what their reservation looks like. I have no idea.
I thought it was interesting that utility, which I would assume that their water right is for potable water, that they were then able to go ahead and sell that much excess for irrigation purposes out of the county. Is that kind of like sketch for what they were even doing? Do you know?
No,
Temporary leasing, is that what they're doing there?
no, just selling that excess water. At least have the ability to do that. I can't remember the statute reference.
When you sell, do you not have to be responsible for what that water is then being used for?
I believe that's the use for a beneficial purpose, but
Watering a golf course is beneficial. It's
irrigation. Just like irrigating alfalfa field. Without the water trees.
All right, I think we're done with the running through these, feeling good?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, so, two things, if you could advance. Two times. So, I think we should eat while the food's hot. I also think, that in the next 20 minutes while we're having lunch, I'd like for all of you to be thinking about what alternative categories are missing from our list of categories, the buckets, and then what alternatives themselves are missing. We've already had a little bit of discussion of those. But when we come back, it would be helpful if you all had some thoughts on those two initial questions. So I'll give you 20 minutes to chat up your fellow TAC members and steal ideas from them. And maybe we can reconvene here in 20 minutes or so 1/4 past. Fair? Okay.
So much of this comes back.
and whatnot, we'll bring us back in regular order here. Looks like the camera's on, mic's on. So what I have done here is taken Zach's buckets and put them up in blue, okay? And then I tried my best there was some discussion about alternatives that may be missing or need to be emphasized or that sort of thing. So I tried to put those where they logically go, I think, you tell me. So I guess the question that I'd like to start off with, can anybody identify a missing bucket?
I was really, happy that Holly mentioned what she did right before, and maybe it doesn't make sense to the group for it to be its own bucket, but I do think, I'd
You're
be
referring to
curious.
forest health and poverty, that sort of thing? Or
No,
yield
no,
increase?
I'm referring to, I think watershed yield, improving watershed yields could be considered. I think that could get big enough that maybe it could be separate from storage, but, because I see it including like larger restorative efforts that, I don't know, when I have the criteria in mind, I know aren't going to result necessarily in like direct and tangible volumes immediately, but that do contribute to overall storability in the long term. So that's something, and I think natural storage, nature-based solutions, process-based storage could fit within that, but I'd be curious what the group thinks.
Yeah, who has an opinion on whether increasing yield might belong in its own bucket?
I like I don't know what you call it, right? I think in one sense in my mind, I was thinking nature-based solutions or something like that.
Yeah.
Because increasing yield could mean, like all of them could maybe, also the way we have it, it feels like some nature-based solutions are kind of fitting under some of the existing categories too, but I think just highlighting that we are utilizing our existing supply in our most efficient and resilient way that we can somehow in this plan would be pretty important.
Exactly, yeah. I think each of these alternatives, the intent is to improve and increase the city's resilience, like resiliency in times of drought. I think that the spirit of those process-based, nature-based ideas are couched in improving resiliency. Like that is fundamentally, foundationally, like what they're intended to do on ecological, social, and environmental scales.
One question for the group to think about is if we create nature-based solutions as its own category, does that make it more challenging to incorporate those concepts into some solutions that might be a combination of nature-based and constructive?
That's kind of what I'm wondering, if there would be resistance to that, or if it would make sense to parse out whatever would be included in that category and bucket them elsewhere. So that each category itself, or maybe most of the other categories themselves, have those approaches built in. Maybe that would be a more appropriate or a more realizable.
What's most common, Barbara, in your experience?
It depends, on the situation and the client. For example, one could look back to the Corps of Engineers authorization and when there was a requirement and an authorized purpose for environmental restoration, water suppliers got really creative and ended up figuring out like how to improve spring flow, how to restore habitat so they could meet the benefit cost analyses and get their projects funded. So from a practical perspective, I kind of like combining them because but there could be some things that are flagged, like beaver dam analogs or, simulated, things like that, or low head dams that, simulate what makes, how nature used to act. So I don't know, I think it could go either way. I think my sense is the important thing is a clear notion that that's important, and to make sure those options are clear.
Oh, yeah, great.
Dan, could you expand a little bit on what you mean by nature-based?
Oh,
Yeah,
right.
you know, I think about, when I hear that, the only thing I think about is like beaver dam mimicry, that kind of stuff, or maybe, you know, revegetation and riparian zones, but
So, there's a lot of creativity in that field, in this approach. It could even be, like, I've been thinking about this in my own planning work, when it comes to leveraging different types of irrigation, efforts and irrigation strategies. So, you know, it's not necessarily blanketly going, let's say, from like sprinkler to flood, but like incentivizing different, it could be something like incentivizing irrigators or water users to incorporate methods of irrigation that result in the same services being provided, but like environmental services being met and human needs being met. So I think of nature-based solutions or natural water storage in general as being those ideas and those projects that meet human and environmental needs. It can be broad. Beaver dam analogs are an easy thing to come to. Beaver mimicry has been such a huge, it's been cheerleaded so much in the last like 15, 20 years. That's an easy example. The watershed scale part of it is considering that distributed approach to it. So like, you know, not having necessarily one massive system, but the distribution part of it, like the distributed nature of it is what can make nature-based approaches more successful. I'm wondering, I'd be curious, like from Clayton's side, just working for an organization that realizes this work.
Yeah, I mean, I was going of two minds because I tend to be of the mind of including it in other pieces. Then I was asking myself the question, have I done that because that's the politically expedient way? Like in a conservative legislature, it's a lot easier to put it as a storage concept, because when we talk about water storage, it is politically popular. When you start talking about natural processes, people's eyes glaze over. To me, natural floodplain restoration, watershed yield, forest health, beaver dam analogs, all those sorts of things fit under a natural storage concept. So I could see that, I'm similar, that I see value in incorporating it underneath the existing buckets. I also see a value, particularly in the public-facing communication, of highlighting it, that it is part of all of these solutions, and maybe the extra bucket helps make it more intentional for the public to follow along. So I'm of both minds. I would add floodplain reconnection and restoration in addition, just because that intentional work has yielded quite a bit of success for TU and their projects in terms of getting water up into the floodplain and reconnecting those floodplains.
Can you write bigger?
No. If I did that, it would reveal how awful my handwriting is. But Tim, you're welcome to come up here. It's helpful.
can't check your spelling either.
You're right, I need to write that bigger.
Yeah, floodplain reconnection, I think, is a big part of that.
And riparian vegetation and reestablishment, I
Yes.
think all kind of go hand in hand.
Yep,
I've even thinking about things like for some of the groundwater, with management or for recharge and things of that nature, doing it in tandem with whatever makes sense, whether it's constructed wetlands or some, you know, if there's any places where there's so many, where you could get multiple benefits.
yes,
I
yeah.
almost said, two birds with one stone, but that.
I do think that the Gallatin too, that there are producers here and irrigators that are not only amenable, but willing and excited potential like participants to collaborate with on, I mean, the incentives that I think could be there to bring in that production piece, like I've talked to a few producers in other parts of the basin and here who are open to converting parts of their land that they're no longer producing for various reasons, but to see what the restorability of those areas are along their personal laterals, their personal conveyance systems. But I love that you mentioned like that creativity piece. It opens doors for creativity. I really like seeing when that happens, yeah. I know it's so broad and big though, it can be hard to pin down. Some examples to explore.
And that around the sort of political piece, Clayton, I wonder if within the city or our watershed, if that culture, climate is a little different maybe than the state, and actually in our case, bringing it out or highlighting it in a way would be a benefit to this plan feeling, and not just feeling. I think that this is the sentiment of the city, and it's in alignment with other plans that the city has, like the climate plan and the parks, the Pratt plan, for example. And so being consistent in that way, where the messaging around how we're prioritizing resilience of our natural resources, I think should be consistent in this plan as well. And so I think that's to say, I could see it either, fitting under each of the existing categories, but perhaps then in a preamble to the plan, it's highlighted that this is one of the priorities and intentions and goals of the alternatives that we've identified, or parsing it out. But in either case, I think natural solutions and nature-based solutions being central to and foundational to the plan is really important.
Yeah, and I would certainly defer. I mean, we're exposing the fact that I don't actually live in this community, and I would defer to you all how to communicate best with the community. I tend to work in a bit more conservative political environment.
I'm less open to what others think in the TAC.
And I live in Butte, where we love building concrete things, so.
Well, another thought, and it's probably not a good idea, or maybe it'd be too messy, but I mean, right now you're trying to take all these alternatives and put them into just one of these buckets. Is there any, from the standpoint of the public and the PAC, is there any reason not to? Like, if we have an alternative that falls under several buckets, why not list them under all the buckets they fit in, so that the public.
I can see a matrix, right? Here's the buckets, here's the alternative, X's through all of them, so we can have multiple.
Yeah, I mean, from the public's perspective, they could say, well, this one's, it's 3 or 4 different buckets, but.
To your point, I can see the nature-based alternatives getting a little green leaf next to them in the report that indicates that it's part of a broader and more intentional type approach to things. A to S, do you have any feelings either way on whether distributing these across multiple buckets or having an independent bucket would be easier or more productive in your work?
I don't think so. I think it just, putting in into buckets helps just frame things a little and guide the conversation. Not necessarily, it's not necessarily going to wind up being like this in the report, per se.
Yeah. And I think maybe I'll ask the group, the more important thing is that those alternatives show up in the report, not where they show up, right?
Yeah.
Consensus on that? Okay.
I think that could be a valuable criterion to add to.
Okay.
Potentially.
Yes,
Yeah,
thank you.
good point.
I have the same feedback.
A couple other questions. Cloud seeding, obviously cognizant of the sort of landmines that come with talking about cloud seeding, but because when I think about cloud seeding, I think about making new water or more water. In the reuse, it might be intentional just because of the recent press. I know you use the example locations, but I'm in conversations with the city of Dillon about how they can use the snowmaking option to recycle and reuse wastewater. And other communities, I think we're gonna have actually a very intentional conversation with the Legislative Water Policy and Interim Committee about how this snowmaking reuse through aquifer recharge or whatever might be. So since that is in the news, that might be something to use there. And then the other question I had, and I should have raised this on the groundwater piece, which this is less about communication and more about thinking about our TAC alternatives. My question was, are we intentionally thinking in the groundwater development that when we say wall construction and improvements that tap into local Gallatin Valley aquifers, we're talking about exempt walls? Like what sorts of wall construction? I raise this because of the regulatory uncertainty around relying on that exemption, and particularly with some things that are coming down the pipe, both in potential legal action and also what the legislature may or may not do as a result or be forced to do. I just wouldn't want us to put a bunch of eggs in the basket around exploring continued use of exempt walls as a strategy, or at least putting a flag next to that as in terms of criteria and sort of looking into the future of regulatory uncertainty from the state and how that's used. So those are two other thoughts I had.
One comment that I'll make while you guys are still thinking is sometimes I find it helpful to even include really bad ideas on the menu. They don't necessarily make it to the table, but that way you don't have the, did you think about right at the end of the process.
Thank you for saying that, I didn't wanna say, and I don't think it's a really bad idea, that was my thinking with the water import, conversation, is that maybe it's great, maybe it's not so great, but the fact that we would have numbers backing either one up is valuable to me. I'm not calling it, I don't know if it's a really bad idea.
I call it the shiny object criteria.
Yeah, even better, yeah.
And I recently worked with the city of Calgary, and there were some really good ideas. They just weren't legislatively doable. At that time, there just wasn't a way to get it done. There was no legislation about reuse, as an example. And so what they decided to do was keep it in their plan, knowing not as a must-do, but as a let's take the next card and see if we can develop this coalition and, change the policy. So I'm wondering if there's any kind of policy things that aren't necessarily physical solutions that we want to be explored.
I mean, I think on the reuse side, there are policy questions that might be unresolved at this time, but maybe resolved 10, 20 years from now.
Well, sometimes you create a plan and then you get some backing from the politicians to actually move regulation to support that, particularly if it supports a need.
Yeah, the recycled snowmaking change in statute was a great example of that.
Any notes I should put down under reuse, under that category, or is that just for the team to be aware of?
I think it could be a separate individual alternative snowmaking. I think it's been conceived of and brought up before, especially with the ski trails over at Sunset Hills, which is right near the cemetery, and could rely on either the non-potable use of aggregates there that are already being used or potentially reused.
It's a great idea.
So how can I know to think of that?
I would just say snowmaking.
And if there are really great ideas of reuse type things, the legislature is looking at them right now, and we could push and influence that through the water reuse study that Water Policy Committee is doing. The time is right.
So maybe we move on to just kind of trying to exhaust the list of alternatives that are missing. We've made progress, but any we haven't noted yet.
Well, one I thought of, I don't know, I mean, it's kind of in there, but we do have, at least under the new list, aquifer storage and recovery. And there's a lot of people use different acronyms for that, but you know, the broader scale, it seems like most people refer to this as managed aquifer recharge. And then aquifer storage and recovery would be one type, focused usually on trying to pump water into some confined aquifer. But surface water storage and then recapture potentially down gradient is another form of that. It's not necessarily on here where we would take water out of the ditch during high flows on the south side of the valley, let's say, and put it into the aquifer and then 4 months later pump it out of the ground down gradient kind of approach. But so I don't know if you want to include that with ASR or if that would be a separate option or not.
I was thinking about that with optimization of irrigation for ditches is, maybe along with some type of off-stream or off-ditch, on-ditch storage for the city's portion of those rights, but, identifying those, I think we all understand the importance that ditches have in this watershed. And so not lining all ditches, but being really considerate and intentional about optimizing the ditch networks in a way that doesn't prevent aquifer recharge or seepage, but just, I guess, optimizes conveyance to those areas where that intentional recharge into groundwater is beneficial. Yeah, which I guess would require a study, but I think that that's underway in various different projects right now. I think that could fit though within currently the optimization of water rates.
Yeah, or fit under either change ASR to manage aquifer recharge. Both methods.
Yeah.
And then another one that I've been thinking about is maybe pretty high in the sky, but it would fall under the groundwater development category is this idea of, I was asking Clayton that there's a lot of water right questions, but there's all, gravity data from the Gallup Valley that's been around for a long time that shows suggests some pretty deep sedimentary pockets in this basin where you may have, estimates are anywhere from 3,000 to 6,000 feet of sediment, which means that there could be some fairly large confined aquifers down deep that nobody's ever really documented. So the question would be, could you drill a deep well into a confined aquifer to get a new groundwater supply? And, I guess the question I have is, does that get you away from the closed basin rules in terms of water permitting and stuff?
Oh, man.
And one of the reasons that, just so you know, one of the reasons that I'm really interested in this is because I just recently learned that different oil companies shot seismic lines back and forth across the valley in the late 80s. So, and it's pretty good high resolution seismic, well, mid 80s, 83, 84. So it's very good data, and you can purchase it. And so we've been actually, sitting down with the consultants and looking at kind of the raw squiggly line data that they, try to decide whether we want to apply some of that data to learn more about what the structure of the whole basin looks like. Specifically crossing some of the two big holes are one that supposedly would be just east of Belgrade, and another one along the Gallatin Range front. And so that just got me thinking about, exploring for deep groundwater that nobody's ever documented.
I would say that in the time scale of this plan, which is 50 years?
Yeah.
The Upper Missouri Basin closure terminates upon final decrees. So, I would hope we would have final decrees by the point 50 years from now.
We said it 50 years ago.
It's always 50 years away.
Yeah.
That's hopeful. In theory, there might not be some of I mean, I think you would still have permitting challenges, but that basic closure might not be.
And then trying not to get, I mean, I was talking with Danica over the break, I mean, it seems like so many of these things come back to the water rate question, but I guess we don't really, you know, in terms of like picking alternatives, I guess we can kind of back away from that a little bit and just throw ideas out, so that would be the only other one I have.
So that's what attorneys are for, to come later.
I think that's a solid thing to just mention though, like an honorable mention is something that can and should be studied maybe like at the state level or something, like, I think that's a valuable thing to include, even if it's not explored.
So I'm looking for a grant to drill a really deep hole, so if anybody has any ideas.
When you're saying deep, how deep are you actually thinking of with regards to?
2,000 to 4,000 feet.
Okay.
In the
So it'd be
state
an oil well, basically, that kind of rig, just to get it to the end.
Nate, was that in Hamilton that Julie was just telling us about the example? The 6,000 foot well, I think it was in Hamilton,
I believe it.
was just drilled and the DNRC said it was connected to groundwater, or to surface water.
Oh.
So,
Really? What was the purpose of that one?
municipal.
Oh, okay.
One thing that, on the storage front that I brought up at the last meeting, that I think it's worth intentionally thinking about is, and I know that Brian sort of bristled when I said this, but is ownership of highlight. There's a number of mentions of highlight, including raising the level and volume preservation. But one piece that could add to the security of that water sourcing long term would be ownership of the reservoir facility.
in the spirit of throwing out ideas.
Yeah.
So maybe in the storage realm, considering potential of snow farming and snow mounds, and I know that they've done a little pilot up at the Yellowstone Club of that, maybe the potential is very low, but Headwaters Academy worked with the Yellowstone Club to do a pilot project, and I think in India, that's actually, there's pretty amazing potential there for storage, so I'll go check.
Snow mounds being like compacted with, like straw or like to,
Insulated.
yeah, insulated snow mounds. Yeah, that was a great project they did, they were super into it. I was curious about, and I started looking this up, but I figured I would just ask city people.
Yeah.
Landscaping, like I know you've got great demonstration gardens, but I'm curious about the portfolio of, I guess like different turf grasses in city parks and just the overall drought resilience or drought tolerance of the cities. Like park system, is that something that is already being, like, already in the works, already being explored, like, is that, or is that not worth including here?
Yeah, so I think there's opportunity for the city to do more there. We've explored some kind of like fescue blends to try to get away from your traditional turf grass. Some of those have been successful, some we've had challenges with like invasive grasses and stuff. But definitely overall, like thinking, into the future with like future parks and other spaces that the city is responsible for, I think there's a lot of opportunity. And one thing I actually omitted from this presentation was conservation, because I was like, all right, well, there's all these supply alternatives, and then there's all this conservation stuff, and we thought maybe we could revisit that in more detail later. But let's definitely, if you have ideas, go into it. But I think like there will be opportunity down the road to say, okay, here's all these supply alternatives. And then what about the conservation side? Like what should we be outlining as recommendations there? Cool. But yes, we can do that now as well.
One other thing, maybe it would fall into the non-potable supply, but has there been any thought into reuse for irrigation purposes for captured rainwater or stormwater runoff? Somehow figure out a way to capture that and store it and then use that for irrigation?
maybe thinking large scale irrigation, like irrigated cropland or,
I'm
or
envisioning initially is more like
residential.
parklands and things like that, so smaller projects, but, you know, it's really nips away at one of the bigger uses of water, which is typically irrigation over domestic purposes in the house, so. But I know, I know the city now is under, what they call the MS4 rules for stormwater management, and the county's coming underneath that, so somehow managing stormwater is gonna become more important. I think we have a stormwater utility now too, right?
Oh, yeah.
So I think right now the idea is to, manage that in a way that we get rid of it without causing problems. But the question is there ways we can store it and reuse it?
Valuable resource. Does Montana have rain barrel laws for residential?
I would like to pass that to Danica because I don't have that.
I'm purposely not saying anything about rainwater capture, but, basically, like, yes and no.
Got
You answered it the way I would.
Yeah.
Unclear.
But I think, to your point, right, the idea here is not to get hung up on things like legal uncertainty, so I think it's a great thing to consider as an alternative.
Just the little things.
Yeah.
So I have a question about how the city handles stormwater. And I understand that in the downtown area, it just all goes into the sewer grading and piped away. But I don't know how they handle it in kind of the subdivisions, but is it just simply piped and then eventually goes back into streams?
So when it's being piped and not going into like a detention or retention pond, right? So that's like a lot of what you see kind of in the subdivisions. When it is being piped, yeah, it does go directly into our creeks. We have a lot of filtration like systems built within that infrastructure to like clean that water before it's discharged. So that it's, what you're seeing running down the curb isn't exactly what's ending up in the creek. So we do have like additional infrastructure to improve basically, the water quality of that.
Yeah, the city has retrofitted a bunch of treatment units into the urban stormwater system, and I think they continue to add more and more.
So I guess my question is, we're talking about how to recharge groundwater, and I assume this is just solid pipe that is transporting it directly to the stream. So my question is, why wouldn't you use slotted pipe? And so rather than just send it away into the stream, just allow it to then, you collect it and then just run it through a slotted pipe, and then you distribute it all the way back into the groundwater. Is that, I don't know if there's regulations that say you can or can't do that. And I understand you're gonna have some potential problem with if the slots and the potential for it to then clog, but if it's a continuous slotted pipe, then along that whole distribution line, you're literally, by the time it gets to the end, there may not be any water, but you've then successfully distributed all that instead of, you're collecting it what has hit the pavement, then bring it into the collection system, and then just distribute it along the groundwater, and you've now kept it where it would have been had it just been natural grass.
Sure.
So I don't know what the city does, or, I mean, it's an idea that would be feasible.
I have no idea, yeah.
And I don't know what the regulations are for stormwater collection and distribution, but it's a pretty simple way. And not that you would retrofit any existing system, but with all the construction we're talking about, we're already removing ag land. And the biggest problem is now all that water that would have been normally recharging into the groundwater anyways, now we're collecting it and then sending it down to the stream faster. It's like, why don't we just try and redistribute it back to where it would have floated? So,
And would you be open to the notion of maybe broadening some of those alternatives to include different kinds of green infrastructure? Maybe it's swales and not slotted pipelines, maybe it's different pavement options or things of that nature for new development.
yeah, and I'm in no means an expert on stormwater removal and development into subdivisions, but
A lot of those options like that too sound to me like they would be, potential for somehow using that for credits for mitigation.
Yeah.
Is probably more likely where that would fall into place. You could do something like that, but keep that water in the ground and then say that you're mitigating for a new groundwater use. So if the city wanted to go ahead and drill more groundwater wells, which, there's water to be had in groundwater, the challenge is the water right side. And that's where some of that stuff, so they may interconnect a little bit more than they realize, but.
Is that another category then?
What's that?
The green infrastructure?
Yeah.
Well, mitigation strategy.
Oh,
I think green infrastructure
Could be.
can fall nicely under a category like that.
I mean, to me, the mitigation, a number of things across the spectrum could be used as mitigation tools for mitigating new appropriations.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's kind of back to this, do you create a new category or is it underlying a number of them?
distributed through.
I mean, I think the like water reuse also,
Yeah.
potable water, you could do a lot around mitigation. Send the appropriations there as well.
With retention ponds, we created those for the same effect of trying to go ahead and keep the groundwater within that area, surface water to groundwater. But, and then the city is trying to work with the new developers to then drill those wells in that area to then do whatever irrigation for the suburban, parklands. So we want to make sure that they have water, groundwater to use for that very specific purpose, rather than just pipe it away like it's lost.
I also wanted to highlight a new opportunity, I think, and I think maybe the solar project might be the best lens of which to view the opportunity or sort of that concept, but there's a new statute that allows for temporarily leasing water for up to 40 days. And it's up to the full consumptive volume of the water right. And the important thing when we reinstated the statute in 2025 versus the old statute that expired in 2019 is it now allows for storage so that you can lease that full consumptive volume and store it. So in my mind, it's like a solar type project where you're leasing that water, creating some sort of storage facility, be it a gravel pit or whatever that may be. The water right holder is getting paid for it. And then it's now.
Beneficial use, just the storing is beneficial use.
Yeah, and then you're limited to using it for beneficial use. I don't see the city using their water for anything other than beneficial use, so you should be fine there, but, anyways, I think the storage component of that law creates a new opportunity related to leasing. Because prior to that, the leasing statutes probably wouldn't have been terribly useful in the context of municipal supplies, but having that storage component.
What's the 45-day? Can you explain that?
You're limited to leasing water for 40 days. They don't have to be consecutive, they could be 40 days within a calendar year. So you could lease it for 5, 10, 20.
But the person that takes that water, they could, over that 40-day period, they could take the water, but then they could use it over a longer period.
You're not limited to the use, you're just.
It's a 40-day limit on the
diversion.
water rate holders.
Right, yeah.
So you could really lease it for a couple of years, but then only divert it no more than 40 days? Okay,
And
because
there's
otherwise it's not a big work.
the limit too is 5 years within a 10-year period.
Yeah, you can only lease an individual right, up to 5 years in a 10-year period, but I think.
Do you think the Gallatin Water Trust, I think that's what it's called, will be looking at that as an option?
I'd be surprised if they aren't.
Yeah, I think that their, idea is sort of more around the mitigation issue and.
Gotcha.
I think of this temporary leasing, especially outside of the storage component as a quick action, strike and take advantage of, an opportunity to lease water. It was my TU add-on, we're thinking about it in the context of keeping a stream wet for 40 days in late summer. But I think with this new storage component, it could have some utility beyond that strike attack kind of approach.
Okay.
When it was still before the previous statute sunsetted, I remember only one application being submitted by someone, like, at least to the state for a temporary lease, and that was in Flint Creek, and
Yeah, that
that was.
statute also had a volume limitation of like 160 acre feet or something, but the way that we wrote the bill this time, you're just limited to the consumptive volume of the underlying water rate.
And the place of use where that water rate, or where that water was used can't be in use during.
Yeah, you have to retire the consumptive
Yeah.
volume of use for the water rate holder, but.
So does that mean it couldn't be used for like, a drier option? Do you know what I mean by that? Because many states or certain areas have, it's not really a water market, but it kind of is, where a senior water user, oftentimes an irrigator will say, we'll have a longer term contract with certain, financial triggers, depending on where they are in growing season, and, you know, the municipality can say, hey, we think there's gonna be a drought, and, you know, and so the irrigator says, okay, I won't use X amount of water that's under this longer term agreement for this period of time during a drought.
Sort of a split season lease concept, a split season lease concept as well, is another way.
I'm gonna have to look that one.
I think that, you could do that under temporary change, under 407.
The ground, the place where the water that's being leased,
But you're talking about 178.
there is no split, like, that, it can't be used the year that it's gonna be leased.
In 178,
Yes.
that's what I'm saying. I don't think under Senate Bill 178, you could necessarily structure that, but under 852407,
Yes.
like temporary change,
Yes, that's where that usually plays out.
you could
That is
structure
correct.
something that way. We've certainly structured, in-stream flow leases that way, that there's a sort of flow trigger that institutes the shut off of irrigation and conversion to the in-stream flow purpose.
Yeah.
So under 852407, I think you could do that.
So Jessica, that kind of falls in line with your drought, alternative,
The
drought
reserve.
reserve. You potentially, you know, play into that a little bit. And that would also give you some relief depending on how hard your conservation cut into the demand as well.
And you said it was Senate Bill 178?
It's the 40-day. Yeah, so it's 82, 247.
852407. Sorry, you're normal, I'm abnormal. It is abnormal to know these things off the top of your head.
That's why you do what you do.
Yeah,
It's the temporary lease statute,
no, that's temporary change.
or temporary change, sorry, temporary change statute, that's.
The temporary lease statute is 852428.
Okay, who in this room would like me to make your homework a lot easier? Two folks, in that case, we're done. So, if we feel like we've kind of exhausted the independent alternatives that we should be considering, I'd like to move on to the next part of today's meeting, which is talking about how we're going to score these alternatives. So there are, the way that it was scored in the 2013 IWRP, which is by weighting in certain categories, and we'll go over these categories. So the thought here is that AE2S needs guidance on how to measure the validity and the value and the, you know, how good each one of these alternatives is against what you guys say are the scoring criteria. So our starting point is the 2013 IWRP, right? We want to present those scoring criteria to you now and get a sense of, you know, are there any criteria that are missing, or there's criteria in here that made sense in 2013 but don't make any sense now. Your homework is going to be to basically fill out a chart that kind of looks like this, okay? And you'll note that in all of these areas, there's a weighting to it. And so in each one of these areas, we're gonna have you add up numbers, so each one of these equals 100, but you'll give a sense to the evaluation team of kind of how much weight to put on any one particular one of these things, okay? So if we can spend the next hour together, of our scheduled time together, talking about what those evaluation criteria were last time, and then talking through if there should be any additional, I think you guys are going to be in really good shape to just really cruise through your homework assignment later this month. So that sound fair?
Can I interject?
Please.
We, just to verify, we're not gonna go over, alternatives from 2013 and yay or nay them right now, is that correct?
Yes.
Could I just take a few moments to share Becca, who couldn't be here?
Oh, yeah.
Because that's sort of, she had provided some input on alternatives that were in the last hour. So if I could just, and you all have a copy of this, but just for the record, if I might just
Read them in.
talk through them a little bit, just so I get it out there. I don't wanna derail us, but.
Not at all.
Okay. So she had provided some input. So Becca represents Aggie, the Association of Gallatin Agricultural Irrigators. The question was, what alternatives should we account for in the IWRP update? Really focused on the ones from the last plan. And so without going into all the detail of what she wrote, since you all have it, I'll just share that she generally felt, or the group Aggie felt favorable about non-potable water reuse, citing an example of Riverside Golf Course, and having East Gallatin diversion well water used for their irrigation. Cautious, so moving on to the next one, was that they felt cautious about ag irrigation water use. A non-favorable example within kind of that umbrella would be providing wastewater effluent to obtain water rights from Beck-Jones Canal, saying that this would likely increase the use of copper sulfate in managing algae growth in the ditch and canal, having negative impacts on fish populations and water quality in general. And then the last one within this would be unfavorable about developing adjacent drainages, citing Canyon Ferry import, Yellowstone import, and just mentioning that the caution would be making sure that they're diligent, or we're diligent, about managing, maintaining current rights and options for cost-effective recovery. Just wanted to say that. And then some of the others were, they're very favorable for wastewater effluent reuse, favorable for stormwater capture and reuse, which we discussed a little bit. Cautious about canal improvements to optimize use, likely, just citing what we've discussed in terms of how, canals recharge groundwater and just making sure we don't lose that benefit. And then favorable about expansion of non-potable irrigation. There's a little bit more on the back, just kind of general comments talking about the scoring, but I just wanted to hit those before we totally shift gears, so.
Was there anything in conflict with what we talked about today?
I don't think so. I think when we get to the point of kind of nixing ideas, maybe, hopefully she'll be able to be in person and provide that input, but since we're not there, I'm not concerned that we're not capturing anything that they provide.
Are there any reactions from the group to the note? Becca?
I guess I'm trying to understand regarding the non-potable water reuse, talking about repurpose or retiring the water right for Riverside Golf Course. Why would they choose to want to do that if they're going to continue to want to irrigate the golf course? I'm not quite understanding that comment.
They'd swap it out for effluent, treated effluent from the wastewater plant.
Oh, okay.
That's what that alternative is.
Okay, thank you. And that makes perfect sense because of the proximity to our, if anybody can use it to the best
Right.
point and least amount of cost to go ahead and ship it back, it's Riverside, so okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
And nutrients are beneficial for the golf course.
All right,
I guess
Move along.
really quickly,
please.
and I'm maybe interested in Susan hearing from her perspective. I don't think it's an alternative or a category, but something that feels like it could be missing to me is sort of the social aspect of how we are working with adjacent communities within the county, within the larger Gallatin watershed, to be sharing.
Regional approach?
Exactly, yeah, and I'm not sure, to me, that's more things like communications and collaboration and meeting, like things like that. And I'm not sure if that's something that is ever incorporated into plans like these, and maybe that falls into more like the collaborative work that we're doing, and that's kind of captured there. But I wonder, Susan, if you see that ever in this kind of planning?
Totally. You know, sometimes it can be a recommendation that's not a specific, something that doesn't need to be assessed and analyzed from an engineering perspective. But you know, so it could be something that I think you mentioned previously in the preamble, you know, part of the guiding, not the guiding principles, but sort of priority perspectives, you know, along with nature-based solutions and all the other things we've talked about today, to consider different activities that either continue those ongoing conversations or take it to the next level. You know, whether it's a water summit or different planning conversations, whatever that might look like in the future.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna maybe provide a little bit more context on the recent work that was done by the city, the county, and Belgrade on that regional approach. And I don't wanna give the wrong impression that I keep beating that regional drum, but one of the aspects that came out of that as a recommendation was, so when we first put that plan together, the county was interested in sponsoring it. The city of Bozeman contributed, you know, probably the largest sum of financial contribution to that, and then Belgrade kicked in something I think similar to what the county did. And we asked, I don't know, almost every water district or public water system in, you know, reasonable distance if they would want to participate as well. So Manhattan, Four Corners, Three Forks, you know, they were all given the opportunity to participate in that. Obviously, you know, 3 entities saw value in it, the others, you know, for whatever reason, didn't. But as we closed down that work effort, we did, you know, encourage there to be continued dialogue about, you know, working together in you know, to more along the lines of what you're suggesting. And you know, the only thing was, it was just 3 entities. And I think, you know, Belgrade and Bozeman are still communicating along the lines of, you know, what the effort was about. But if, you know, making it a bigger effort, you know, you can extend the olive branch. It's another to, you know, get the entity to participate.
The landscape looks different now too, I think. There are really collaborative, there are groups that are doing a lot of collaborative work with each other, and I think there's greater capacity now than there was 12 years ago. But that regional, I really like that regional perspective being included, just because when it comes to needing external funding, at least for state funds, when it comes to mitigation project grants or obtaining that funding and obtaining like planning funding, crucial state need is a major requirement, but like whatever is being proposed be tied back to the crucial state need, and regionalization really helps with that. And I think just down the line, when any work that a community is doing or that a group is doing can be extrapolated to inform other decisions statewide, I think that promotes those ideas eventually, hopefully someday making it to the legislature. So just when it makes it to the homes of the legislators and our representatives, that makes it a lot easier when needed in the future to influence state policy and state and statute.
What's the situation for Belgrade, as far as their water needs? Are they pretty well set on their own?
They seem to be.
So they get all their water from deep wells?
Groundwater, they're not all.
They're not super deep.
Well, yeah, not that deep yet. We're not talking 6,000. So their participation in this is not necessarily from they need help as to they're reaching out to be just part of the cooperative effort?
I don't know that I can speak for Belgrade.
Well, I mean,
But I think that they recognize the value in having, participating in that prior study and continuing dialogue with the city of Bozeman.
They're currently working through a comprehensive master plan as well, which includes water supply planning. And that is not concluded yet, so I think it's hard to say with any specificity on where they're at right now. I'd say I'd echo what they said, that they're interested in partnering when it makes sense for them.
I assume they must be going through a similar process with regard to their growth outlook. And how it's exploded and only continuing to explode even faster than what Bozeman is because of better prices on land.
For sure.
All right. Thank you all. Good conversation, exactly what we needed.
Is that all going to be written down by the city to then distribute that to us?
Yes, we will make like a master list of everything
Okay.
in whatever way makes
All the
sense.
different photos?
I was not going to attempt to.
Yeah.
The photos in text is too small.
I'll be in
it's
charge, I'll be in charge of transcribing the photos into this, because I don't really want to read them.
There's a test at the end of it. Sorry. I just threw you under the bus.
I heard, yeah, no, I know it, yeah.
So this isn't the first time you're all seeing this, and I think honestly, the description of each subcategory provided in the previous IWRP are, in my opinion, thorough, and provide a good explanation of what they're trying to capture. So rather than, hopefully you guys have perused that section, the TAC screening criteria descriptions. I think it's on page
It's the 12th through 20th page of the document.
Rather than walking through each one specifically, I think it's best to just, I'll run through these slides, each category here, and then if you want to discuss or have questions on a specific sub-criteria, that's kind of how I think we should go about this. So under technical, constructability, regulations and drinking water quality impacts, infrastructure compatibility, redundancy, and ability to meet planning horizon water needs. Are there any questions about those or discussion or added technical sub-criteria?
This may be more of a general comment, but one thing that comes to mind for me is that when as people sit down, or anybody who sits down and ultimately score these using the criteria. So for example, regulations and drinking water quality impacts, the time frame has some significance. So, I could look at, as we just talked about, flow issues with water rates, we could look at one of these and score it relatively low because we think that the water rates are just gonna be insurmountable, but they may not be 30 years from now, so it might be worth discussing a little bit kind of how the members of the TAC should approach the timing. Does that make sense? You know what I'm getting at?
Absolutely.
When you decide if it's, possible or not, you should probably all be thinking in a similar timescale.
there's sub-bullets under that description. The one says, is the proposed water supply consistent with current water supply standards? Actually, it doesn't say that, but that's what it's getting at. And another bullet is, are there future regulatory issues? So while this one isn't specifically surrounding water rights, I think that comes later. That's a good point for all regulations.
Remember that graphic that we showed, the intent of the screening process is, that first screen would essentially have a water right component. So if an alternative is just DOA, based on water rights, it doesn't necessarily move on. And so I would encourage you to, view these criteria outside of the lens of water rights. Because water rights are kind of their own little beast.
Yeah, and I just using that as an example of something that, we could table an alternative now, but if we were having the same discussion 20 years from now, the water rate rules might be different, and so it was sort of different.
And that's why I think the comment that Susan made, where even bad ideas could potentially be good ideas, if policy does change down the road, at least they're memorialized, or, in the documentation that's prepared as part of this work effort.
One that we haven't discussed, which, I'm sure I'll get luck on the way out here, is in the future, prioritizing water rights. Other states have done that, and ultimately that usually ends up in a situation where municipal rights are usually a higher priority than other rights, which would change the whole environment, 50 years from now, but I know.
You guys are slurping.
Public video.
I've been in video food fights.
I was on the Aggie board for many, many years, so I know the perspective. And, most people would not want to go there, but, when it comes to water law especially, I think if you look at places that have grown more than Bozeman, and you can see where things are going, and so prioritizing water rates, that would be something, I guess, in the strategy that the city would have to try to pursue legislatively, but that's just an example of how radically the water law can be changed.
Yeah, and I think it underscores to Andy's point, in terms of there is absolutely a water right screen, and I think that's great, but then there's also, it seems to me, a little bit more amorphous water policy discussion out here and how the state is changing water policies related to, an example, today is a valid water right. It would meet through a screen of being a valid water right. Is it that the policy is maybe a little bit more volatile around exempt wells than other water policy areas? Thankfully, it's not a body of law that I think radically changes in the way that some other bodies of law do, but the exempt well debate and the concept of treating types of uses differently underneath that policy, I would say, is one of the more volatile areas of that policy debate.
I think it's the spirit of the 2013 effort with respect to the regulations and drinking water quality impacts is that the treatment that's required for a surface water source is much more rigorous than, say, a high-quality groundwater source that is not under the direct influence of surface water or, is of very good quality. And so that was really the spirit of that criteria is if you look at a water source and you say, well, geez, we're gonna have to do a whole nother treatment plant somewhere else in the valley, as opposed to, just run it through the existing water treatment plant, as opposed to just, pump it out of the ground and send it into the system. You can rank those alternatives differently based on that one criteria.
I would love to know more about the city's wastewater permit. I know, the water rights side I'm comfortable with. I'm only uncomfortable because I know so much less about water quality permitting. I can if I have something in front of me that I can walk through, that's great, but, yeah. I know enough to know a lot about what I don't know, so, yeah. I don't think I necessarily am looking for the same kind of walkthrough we had with the water rights, the city's water rights in the last couple meetings, but if there's summary sheet or something that could just be sent out for reference, that would be super helpful for me.
Yeah, we'll put something together if we don't already have something.
Thank you.
Going back to the regulations and the drinking water quality impacts. What I gathered that one of the approaches that we're taking here is that we're looking not to just simply find potable water sources, but we're trying to go ahead and kind of split this and say some of the water that we're going to be collecting is actually going to be used for irrigation purposes and not have to go to utilize it for potable water. So there's different water quality standards then that are going to be used for these two. So this becomes a more difficult kind of question in that our ultimate goal is for potable water versus, yeah, that water is going to be perfect use for, an irrigation.
Correct. So, if you are evaluating water reuse from the water reclamation facility, I think somebody said, golf course irrigation, the golf course would love the nutrients, correct?
Yeah.
So that would probably get you a higher score than if you were, say, direct potable reuse.
Yeah.
Where the treatment is going to be
Substantial.
right. So yes, you do have to look at it maybe through different lenses depending on the end use.
Maybe there's a way to clarify this summary, and I don't have the questions right in front. So maybe it's not drinking water quality per se, if it's non-potable use, maybe it's quality appropriate for use or something like that.
Yeah, so I guess we have to apply this to the alternative that we're specifically looking at and recognizing that that alternative is going to be for a potable use versus a non-potable use, and then recognize that we have to look at it through that prism of there are two different water quality standards that are going to be applied. Is that kind of what we're doing?
Yeah, I think you can change it to regulations and water quality compatibility
Okay.
or something like that.
One other technical criteria that Susan just mentioned is implementation schedule. Yeah,
There's a couple, so after we go through these slides, there's a slide outlining all of them with a few city sort of recommended changes maybe. I'm just food for thought for the group, and it kind of gets at some of this timing implementation stuff. So it could be that maybe we go through all these and then see what's in each one and then sort of look at what's missing kind of collectively.
Yep. Next category is environmental criteria. Clean Water Act compliance, in-stream flow maintenance, permitting environmental impact statements and easements. I just call that permitting on the slide there. Energy generation and carbon footprint, climate impact resiliency, and general, what we're calling, or what they call in 2013, general environmental impacts.
I would assume that none of the options that we're looking at, particularly if we're looking at taking out groundwater, none of those are anywhere near any of our closed groundwater zones from like Buttress Spill and the Idaho area.
No, those wouldn't
Those are,
be allowed.
yeah, I mean, but we're even like far out away from those.
I guess I don't know exactly where they're looking at test sites, but I would think so, yeah.
Okay. The solvent site though, I think is not, it's not close to irrigation wells, is it? I mean, I think you could still drill a well away from the, the source area to Bozeman solvent site. So an example would be the visitor center that was on 19th Street, the new Chick-fil-A, I think, something like that, but, there's irrigation wells in that zone, so it's just, it didn't meet drinking water standards, so it can't be used for that, or it can't, it can't obviously be connected to the city supply, but that one is kind of fading away. I know what the status of the pole is, probably be there for a long, long time.
That's not going anywhere. I mean, you do not want to drill at depth because, those are dean apples, and so those contaminants are literally sitting at the bottom of the bedrock, and that's a no-touch zone for the growth of the valley.
It's a controlled groundwater area.
Yeah. Institutional controls.
Are those the only two within our area of concern, do you know?
I don't know.
The only other thing I could think of would be, and it would be very localized, it would be underground storage tank sites, but yeah, those aren't near the issue that they were 20 years ago.
No. Unless town pump wants to, add to the problem.
So two things that came up for me in this category, which I'd be interested in hearing from other TAC members, I think sort of the valuation of ecosystem services, and that might fall under general environmental impacts, but I want to state that one, and then also cumulative impacts and potentially modeling how the alternative would improve or degrade the impacts, both for ecosystem services and sort of that longer term impact over time. Do those feel like things that are already included here for you all, or that would be additive?
Well, I did have a question. I looked at that last one because I wasn't sure impacts to wildlife, but I wasn't sure what impacts to natural spaces really meant. If that's really just ecosystems, or if that's natural spaces like public open spaces, or what that term is intended for.
Significant impact on local forested areas, fish and wildlife, historical and cultural resources. Endangered Species Act, compatibility.
Yeah, I think
I
that's.
apologize, I don't have, this is the one time I didn't bring my book.
I think ecological services are important to include, or to like directly call out under here somewhere.
I would certainly support that. I would say with my hat on, that interim flow maintenance is sort of the barometer of those things. In that, like, if you can measure the extent to which there would be cumulative impacts or degradation of watershed services by what's produced at the end of that, which is the interim flow, but that might be just a tool in measuring those things, and that might be overly specific to some other ecosystem services. So I'd be supportive of that. I actually think that's a better way to talk about the impacts to wildlife and natural spaces generally, is the sort of ecosystem services. Right.
I agree. Now, is this a place to think about adding, kind of multi-benefit solutions? We were talking about nature-based solutions, and that's like a solution, right, and not a criteria, but there's some notion around that would want to be incorporated into this criteria.
Yeah, I think about that. As you were talking, generally, when I'm in the space of talking about natural water storage or sort of those sorts of things, I'm thinking about it with the analogy of a sponge, and like, how are we increasing the sponge versus compacting the sponge, which to me is about the watershed resiliency and the ability to sort of withstand pressures and changes. So to some degree, that's climate resilience. It depends how you think about climate resilience. Like the way it's, I guess maybe that's more the energy generation and carbon footprint is what I was conflating there a little bit. But to me, the resiliency and natural storage is about how can we increase the sponge of our watershed.
Susan calls it sponginess.
Sponginess, it's a very technical term.
Right, I wondered if that one is kind of watershed resilience, and climate could be a separate thing, or it could maybe squeeze underneath that one, but
I think it's like recognizing that ecological resilience is climate resilience.
exactly, yeah. Ecological, I think that term.
Like you were squeezing it under the other one.
Yes.
So does the group feel like we need to, sorry, I think I'm lost on if we should couch everything under climate resilience that we discussed, or sort of add another category or revise that impacts to wildlife with the general environmental impacts?
My thought was stepping out of the climate frame and talk about watershed resilience. And then, in addition to that and reframing impacts to wildlife, the general environmental impacts into more of an ecosystem services language.
And somewhere in there, incorporating the idea of cumulative impacts. Are you in agreement about that too?
Yeah.
I don't know that it's a separate, bullet point there, but maybe it's part of the in-stream flow maintenance piece.
And the resiliency and for the ecosystem services.
So one thing to think about as we think about cumulative impacts is, I know when I've done environmental impact statements and things of that nature, it can take like a really long time to get to the answer and to really understand what that means, and it requires having typically, sometimes many decades of previous data to rely on. And so we're just wanting to toss out the idea of maybe thinking about how to refine that. You know, are we talking about hydrology? Are we, cumulative impacts on environmental justice? I mean, and to maybe narrow it down, I think would be helpful so that it's achievable within timeframe. I don't know what the answer is, but just something for y'all to maybe think about.
I think in my mind I was thinking more hydrology, and like modeling for that perhaps, or GIS mapping, things like that, but I don't know if that's also a super, involved process.
So you could be modeling anyway, right?
Yeah, I think so. Not sure to what degree.
So like
I think it could be,
Go
I think it could be evaluated qualitatively too. That's how I would think of it.
Yeah, I mean, it made me go to a conversation, but that is sort of in a different place and with a different role. I mean, that's very much in terms of how we're allocating water from a DNRC perspective. I mean, in the example of the, for example, we're always talking about cumulative impacts when you're looking at one-off decisions to permit versus that sort of cumulative impact of a series of decisions. So when you said it, my mind was in hydrology as well, but I don't know where in this context it is that we would look at, like.
So for me, I guess if we're considering reuse on a broad scale, or irrigation, refinement, I'm blanking on the word right now, but what are the in-stream flow cumulative effects?
Yeah.
Is that, and maybe that's following under a different set of criteria, and its cumulative impact isn't the correct word.
Realistic in-stream flow maintenance criteria. Second bullet there. To get specifically at what you're bringing up, but I do think you're bringing up more than just that.
Yeah, that's an example.
I mean, as it relates to the law, in-stream flow, luckily the statute is like fairly clear enough in saying that in-stream flow is a beneficial use, or as like a management strategy is directly intended to augment and enhance stream flows for the benefit of a fishery resource. I think that's laid out pretty clearly for DNRC. I do think that there's, in the actual descriptions of these criteria, under the general environmental impacts, I mean, just in this first line, it does mention, like, does the project have the potential to have significant impact on local forested areas, fish and wildlife, historical and cultural resources, and water quality? Under the tech, I think it's the technical category, regulations and drinking water quality impacts are already called out. So I think that in the general environmental impacts section, water quality could be swapped for riparian ecosystems. Because that, I think those are the ecological services that we're talking about. So significant impact on all those things and riparian ecosystems. I mean, what do you, that's my opinion, what do you guys think?
Some trees on the limb.
To start at least, yeah. It is like comprehensive. I think part of this update that we're trying to do though is further refine these things, just given the new information we have since it was created, so.
I agree that the descriptions that are currently there are pretty holistic and encompassing. I think by adding that ecosystem services that Clayton suggested, I think we cover it pretty well. One other question there, I know I keep coming back to the process pieces, and I think you answered this for me last time, but so the TAC is going to be scoring each alternative within each of, am I understanding that correctly? Each TAC member will be actually doing some of the scoring?
The first step will be weighting them, like assigning weights, relative weights to them. And then I think we're still working through the process of how your feedback will be incorporated into the actual scoring.
I see, okay.
How they'll whack together with the pack, you guys in the pack, how that will all be involved.
Okay, but in the interim there, then, I imagine all of this criteria that we're considering are pieces that you all are taking back to provide guidance on for the committees to take into account before we're selecting and scoring.
Correct.
Yeah, so,
Yeah.
yeah. So not wanting to add more and more work there with what's already pretty encompassing.
Right. Next category is social. Customer service satisfaction, public health and safety, quality of life, overall public support, economic development, growth. And the last one on the, sorry, it's not there, but it's on our, it's in the IWRP. The water marketing and leasing or maintaining ag rigs. That's specifically talking about alternatives that would make it basic, alternatives that would provide flexibility in maintaining ag rights and ag use and municipal use would score high in that. Kind of like what you were talking about, the temporary leasing is a prime example of where I see that would score very high, very high.
So the real value the like social value that's trying to speak to is we value production agriculture on the landscape and we don't want to incentivize removal of agriculture through our water policy choices.
Through the lens of the alternative.
Yeah. Well, same where
I think it would be good to clarify that. This might be me speaking more personally than from a consultant of the city, but like I was a little confused with that too. And like, is that what it's saying? Is it trying to like preserve the agricultural character of, right, or is that? I think it could use the better definition.
I think that's an important social consideration.
that's how I read it because it was under the social consideration.
Yeah.
guess I would interpret that more like, if I was thinking about it, asking the question, is it gonna harm agricultural uses, not so much is it gonna promote them, but.
Yeah, where's your scale going from 1 to 10, right?
Well, this is kind of a crazy thought, but I'll toss it out there. So you mentioned kind of regional planning or regional collaboration and things like that. There was a conversation over there about the regional importance of irrigation, not only economically, but just the whole character of the region. So I'm wondering, and I don't, sometimes you can end up with too many criteria and then it gets really confusing, but would there be some space for regional, some consideration of regional implications? And I think it's woven throughout the work of the criteria as written last time, but maybe that's another preamble idea.
I think like innovation, like if an alternative is not something that's been implemented in other parts of the state, I think that has regional importance in a way that I think is still social and possibly economic too, but I can think about it in that lens pretty easily.
So maybe it's already covered, then maybe we don't need another curriculum.
Or just thinking like, I don't know if there's something in there, maybe I read right past it about an alternative being newer in the state, like at the state scale.
Innovative.
Yeah.
In a positive way.
Yeah. Not bad in a new way, that's not great, yeah. Yeah.
And would an alternative score higher because it hasn't been
I
done?
know, that's why it's smart, yeah.
New can be scary.
I think for having regional impacts and regional importance and being impactful, if it's something that could inform and influence and inspire other municipalities to do this, I think that is worth ranking higher. That's worth creating something that can rank an alternative more highly.
I think something I'm seeing in this section that might be getting at this region, like everything you guys are talking about, is that I'm seeing a lot of things like, would this increase the quality of life for the residents in the city of Bozeman? Will City of Bozeman residents support this? Very much city, and this is a City of Bozeman plan, of course, so I think that's the target audience, but I think when we're talking about regionalization or ag, it's broader than that actually, and so perhaps this criteria is sort of our larger community and not solely just like how will this increase the quality of life for our valley or our community? Perhaps, maybe that's what we're stepping, but that might be getting a little bit getting at where we're speaking.
I totally agree. I think that we can't just look at the city of Bozeman. The economic future is not independent of the ag community, Beltways community, so it's all regionally connected. So, yeah, is it, the description here in the city of Bozeman, I think that we should expand that to land within the valley.
And partly because I was looking back at Rebecca's comments here. When I read this water marketing, leasing, maintain ag rights, because I know Walt so well, I could hear Walt saying all of these things and probably infer where they were coming from. And because Becca's comments said this criteria needs significant expansion to reflect emerging opportunities, it might be hard to tease out this bucket very well without having Aggie in the room.
Yeah, I can reach out to her for more feedback. She also commented on the same thing you just commented on with public support, expanding that beyond city residents. It's just something that city staff were thinking as well, so, yeah.
And I have to kind of go back to my longevity years, like, this has been an ag community. I mean, it was an ag college before it started kind of changing into a lot of different other things. And so, I mean, the heart of Bozeman, the heart of this valley is an ag community. And quite honestly, from a social standpoint, I would never lose that. That is our essence, that's our history.
The PAC will be going over these as well, obviously, and have, I'm assuming, a good input on the social category.
At which point are we going to be meeting as a whole group?
It's like a blind date thing where we're not.
Because if the TAC and PAC get together and we're then the WAC, is that what you said?
That's right.
A few months, I don't know.
It's hard to say.
It's
You
hard.
know,
We
here's
should have a Christmas party.
the challenging part, guys, is that we never know how much progress we're gonna make in any of these meetings,
Yeah.
right? Sure. So it's a little bit fluid, but the time will come when you will meet your PAC brethren, and together you will unite.
Like Wonder Twins.
Wunder twins. Yeah, so, and again, I find myself in this situation of trying to balance respect for your time and schedules after this and kind of fostering a good discussion that we've been having. So I wonder if we can go through, I think there's a lot of valuable things that Jessica's gonna talk about in her table at the end, and I wanna maintain time for that. So I'm wondering if we can kind of do a little bit of a speed run through the balance of these.
Wrap it up in 12 minutes is what you're saying?
That's right, Tim. Yeah, if you wouldn't mind.
So economic criteria, capital and cost, O&M cost, operation and maintenance costs, eligibility for outside funding, economy of scale impacts, and ability for growth to pay for growth. And the last category is water supply criteria. Reliability and control of water supply, initial water quality and water supply, risk of water supply to contamination, proximity to the supply, storage potential, and impacts to other water resources.
I had just made a note that the sort of volatility of regulatory and water policy questions at the state level seem to fit best into that reliability and control of water supply to me. But that was a conversation we were having earlier.
Is there anything in these last two, economic or water supply, beyond Clayton's comment, that when you guys are reading through this, you wanted to make sure to bring up?
I was looking at relative operation and maintenance costs. Is there any possibility that within all these different alternatives that the city would be actually looking at building another water treatment plant? Because of the location where Sourdough is, it's not very conducive to taking water that is way out if we were to go ahead and, find a deep well. Doesn't seem feasible to go ahead and be pumping that all the way over to Sourdough water treatment plant, so.
That cost consideration would play into the evaluation of any alternative, so.
So it is a
water
potential on the table that we should think about?
Absolutely.
Okay.
If water quality of whatever alternative is poor enough to require a new treatment plant, then that cost would be considered boiled into that alternative.
All right, well, if you thought my handwriting on the whiteboard was small, look at the bullets on the.
I've presented it like 10 times.
I'll direct your attention to slide 23. If you get real close, you can check it out, and you'll notice there's some blue sections. Maybe Jess, you want to take one?
So basically, the slide Zach was just on was what's in the IWRP now, the 2013 IWRP. And then we, as the city, had a few ideas of changing some sub-criteria, as well as just sort of like description of them, which I think a lot of those were covered today anyway. I can't even read that, but luckily I have notes. So I'll just highlight some of the things we thought might make sense to change, but we're not really married to any of these. So we had thought it made more sense in the technical criteria to add a sub-criteria for the yield or volume of new supply instead of having the 2 sub-criteria for meeting the 30 and 50-year water supply need. I can go into any detail if you'd like, but I know we're short on time, so I'll just cruise through. We had proposed adding legal certainty to the technical criteria. And our thought was that would address specifically the legal water rights question, but we can move that. Clayton, you had good thoughts on where that could be, maybe under water supply criteria instead.
It's great there too.
What's that?
It's great there too.
Okay, but just wanted to call that one out specifically. And then project duration, I'll come back to that. So we added that under technical. Moving over to the environmental, all we did here was split out like land, like the easements from the environmental permitting with the thought that if you're scoring a certain alternative, thinking about the environmental permitting impacts or hurdles and like land acquisition or easement needs might be different. And so maybe it made sense to separate those out. Shifting over to the social criteria, we'd actually proposed revising the existing economic development and growth criterion to capture like community or growth adaptability, since we felt that the economic criteria, like the main criteria, sort of captured a lot of what was outlined in that. And then per our recommendation, I think Danica, you mentioned this at another meeting, we added the cultural inclusivity and equity piece to the social criteria. Moving over to economic, we added relative implementation time. And so that and then the project duration and technical criteria, we weren't sure how to best approach that, but I think what we're getting at here, what we'd like to try to capture is, so basically, let me see if I can explain this. To capture the like temporal nature of a project, which has a few different pieces, right? So how long does a project take to complete versus how long that might take to expand if it's scalable versus the relative impact of the development timeline. So an example would be, Canyon Ferry takes a long time to complete, right? There's a lot of lead time, but it might be quick to scale up, right? Buy more shares. Whereas like a non-pot policy for irrigation, rights pertinent to properties that are annexed and then used for irrigation might be quick to implement and write policy, but take time to realize water savings. So I guess I'm really thinking about how do we capture that timing element of things as we evaluate these alternatives, and really not sure the best way to do that. But those were kind of the drivers for that project duration piece under technical criteria, as well as the relative implementation time under economic. So mainly food for thought there. And then we also had the thought to revise the overall public support to include folks beyond city residents. So that's what I have there.
Those are great. Getting clear about that implementation timeline and what that means of those different phases of project development is, I think that is important to consider.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you wanting our feedback?
If you
Say
want
yeah,
any?
yes,
Okay.
to include these?
Yeah, if yay or nay, if you have
Yeah,
any thoughts.
I think they're all pertinent. I would say, yes, we could utilize these. Are you then gonna go ahead and give us some new sheets with these then in them so that we could then score this according to these criteria?
Yeah, so what we discussed was that in addition to all the feedback you all gave up to this point, changing some of these like descriptions, if you will, of each of the sub-criteria, kind of taking another look at those, updating per your feedback as well as this, and then giving you basically a revised revised guidance on what each sub-criteria is really getting at so that you could then do weighting for your homework.
Clayton's enthusiastic, we gave a thumbs up, just wanna know.
I don't see any reason not to incorporate them.
Yeah.
That's good.
And the weighting is within each the weighting within each category. It's that we would say, as it is now, like 15%, so that's what you'd like us to do, is weight the different. Okay,
So
So once we.
Great segue.
yes.
So what, that table we see in the IWRP that has the weightings in them, we're gonna create a version for this IWRP update that includes feedback you've received. Sounds like we'll include the recommended changes from staff in that, and it'll be a brand new one of those on the right. And that will be, at some point, what we'll send you a link to do as your homework. And then I'm hopeful that, if we get all of you to do that in time, that then we'll be able to kind of compile those results and come back with a presentation of here's what you guys said, and then have a discussion about whether that feels right to this group. Try to come to consensus on that at the next meeting.
And there will not be names associated with any of our.
No, that's a good point, too. Yeah, they will be anonymous.
And, yeah, it's like, who is this guy?
We're all pretty good at it.
It's like, someone put this at 5%.
And if, when you get this revised list of sub-criteria with the descriptions of them, if we didn't do a great job capturing the discussion, though I tried to take good notes, please feel free to score, or weight them, I should say, anyway, and you feel free to shoot me an email and say like, hey, you're not really capturing the, ecological benefits, or whatever it may be, piece enough, and we can still, I think, revise that as long as it's close enough that everyone's on the same page.
And were you asking if each criterion was equally weighted?
Well,
Because if you look at the top box, if you can see it, I can quickly see it, like, there's different weights for
Yeah, the
technical,
overall,
environment, social, et cetera.
okay, yeah,
So the biggest one last time was environmental. Looks like. So that'll be another question of which, of these areas, how should we do that too?
They're being engineers, because we are, all of those, the 5 added up to 100, is that what it works?
I can ask me to do this.
Yes.
And it'll, so
You appreciate that.
yeah, if we fill it out and the program that we're gonna be working with, it's like says, man, it's like, still not 100. Change your numbers.
great.
Then I'm gonna obsess about it and never sleep again.
So wait a minute, 1 minute to go and
Please,
you did your job? No, seriously, bask in the glory of 45 seconds and you wrapped it up.
I appreciate you guys.
We want you to look good.
That's impossible. You see my breathing stock. It's just.
So no complications with your flights today to get here?
That was nice, yeah, that was a little more relaxed today, right?
Yeah, you were a little,
Screaming, a little hot last time. But yeah,
for a combination of that and then some printing that didn't get done and it was kind of like getting rushed here at the last minute.
well, does anybody have any closing thoughts?
Just to confirm, the next meeting is on the 19th of November.
Yes. And then do we feel like October, this is sort of on us to revise the criteria too, but we'd initially thought October 31st as a deadline to wait, which would be like 2.5 weeks from now.
Yep.
I'm looking at you guys too.
I know.
We need to do stuff too, but I think we can turn that around quickly.
I believe so.
You want us to have it back to you by October 31st?
Ideally, and we'll try to get
Well,
you
it
the
depends on when
criteria
you get it
quickly.
to us, yeah.
30th,
Early next week?
30th.
I have a closing idea,
Yeah, okay.
not directly related to this, but I was wondering if you would consider, if folks are interested, if people both on the TAC and the PAC, so the WAC, anybody that would be interested potentially in
doing a tour of the, either the water treatment plant or the wastewater treatment plant, or both, just to learn more?
Absolutely, we could definitely
And,
do
you know, that
that.
would be something that people could do with their options, and I would certainly do that.
Yep, love it.
It brings a lot of this stuff home, I think, when you really see the infrastructure, so. Agree.
And I think actually going through this exercise and scoring all this will then force us to kind of really question how these things are scored, and then as we've been going through the exercise today, kind of say, can you split that or maybe add something else? And so, you know, at least that's what I'm kind of envisioning going through it. You know, when you're actually forced to start putting numbers to it, you find yourself in that situation of like, I wish I had one other option.
Focuses the mind when you're asked to get up, everything to add up to 100.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So,
That's a good point, yeah.
so I guess I'd be open to giving you some more suggestions if we want to alter something, or we'll just run with this.
And I won't put it out of the realm of possibility that we might have a first run through the weighting exercise. Come together, you see what your peers have been weighting things, and then we make some, the tool I'm gonna use, I could make adjustments in real time. And we could have you guys shoot a QR code on the screen and do the reweighting as a, standalone 20-minute exercise, independent study kind of thing. And then that same program lets us kind of do a quick summary of what the revised things are. So it's a potential I'm gonna be looking into, based on the results that we get from you guys on the first round, whether that would be a valuable exercise to go through, is kind of talk through what the first round was and then do a reevaluation, but I'm kind of thinking out loud right now, so.
Well, I think it'll be interesting to see if we all kind of score it
Exactly.
similarly, and if you see some drastic oddities, that then should trigger us like, wait a minute,
Let's talk about that.
this isn't really quite, doesn't seem quite on board, and maybe there's something that we're interpreting it differently within ourselves, and just address that specifically.
Yeah.
You know,
Well said.
I'm anticipating a bunch of box and whisker charts here, R squared.
All right, without objection, meeting adjourned. Thanks,
well
everyone.
done.
Thank you.
I'll be the first one to.
I still think the WAC, the city should sponsor a WAC Christmas party.